So I'm excited. Next up, we have Jason Mauck from Indiana. Met Jason just yesterday. So we've talked a little bit back and forth on social media. I think it's pretty fascinating what he's been doing. In fact, he's inspired me so much that we went ahead and did a small experiment similar to what he's doing. We've got our cover crop seeder at our farm set up to leave a skip row so that we can put our row crop in between the cover crop rows and not have interference from the existing root mass of the cover crop for getting proper germination. So rather than planting just the cover crops, we thought, why not do the companion crops like Jason's doing? So we just did a small experiment, 191 acres. And we're looking forward to, if you're going to do it, go big or go home, right? So, when you're committed to doing something in a big way, you make sure it gets done. So anyway, Jason, I'm looking forward to you sharing with us your experiences and what the theory is behind why you're doing what you're doing. So please welcome Jason Mauck.
So every 2 minutes, 8 times over, I'm seeing it up here, the sun brings that much energy to the earth that is equal to all the power that we consume as human beings. It's the gas or plant down the road, locomotives, anything that moves, anything that heats, anything is equivalent to the sun's capability in 2 minutes. So wouldn't you think that we would, as farmers, talk about this phenomenon a little bit more often? And why do we not do that? Because it's free, right? There's no bill connected to that. I heard Derek Axon and Bismarck say this quote the other day, and I really liked it. I didn't come here to tell you a fact that you could Google. That's not why I'm here. But he had this saying from Mike Tyson: everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I want to share with you the lowest point of my life. I was 25 years old. I was out of college a few years. And this all happened because there just wasn't room for me on the family farm. My mom looked at the corn prices, and we were really struggling there in the late 90s. And she said, go to college and get a real job. Get that real job. And that's what I was in the middle of. I was selling insurance. I went into home improvement sales. And I had burnt through all of my money that I had saved selling sweet corn. I was a sweet corn peddler growing up and 4-H animals. And I got to this point where I had to borrow $50 from an installer there to give me enough gas money to go on a sales lead that day. And I got there, and the way these leads are generated is you get a county fair, and then you got a call room, and then they get a free gift card. So yeah, I'll have the salesman come out here. Well, I got there, and this house wasn't worth $10,000. I went around, knocked on the doors, and a bunch of roosters, I found them, and they chased me to my car. And I barely made it, shut the door, and I thought, well, I'm completely broke. I'm 2 hours from home. Now what? And I changed my mentality. I always talked to this company, had 50,000 customers, so I didn't have the gas money. It's kind of similar to Gabe's story without the twine. And what I did was I just highlighted all of our past customers, and I just started knocking on doors. And what happened the next 2 months was I was constantly in front of our customers. I didn't have to sell the company anymore, and I was utilizing all my time from 8 in the morning till 5. I mean, Lawrence Welk comes on at 5:30 in front of customers, and I ended up selling a lot more. The company was paying me more in commissions because I was generating this business organically, and I quit about 2 months later. And I kind of had went through all these customers, and I found that, and it really opened my eyes. I didn't really ever feel like I was a bad salesman. I just wasn't ever putting myself in a position to sell. So why that's relevant to farming is goes back to that original stat, the power of the sun. I never felt like we're actually capturing it. So I have been so passionate sharing my story here the last 3 or 4 years on social media, and started this company called Constant Canopy that just does a lot of experiments with this idea in mind. So after sales, I was in landscaping business for about 6 years. This is just the farm sign. And what I really got a good feeling for was all of these plant species just to make a property look good. If you look at a flower bed, you know, the crocuses may come up late February. You've got your daffodils, tulips, spring annuals, summer annuals, and we could stage these, and we could always have a constant bloom at these properties. And I had a lot of success because we really made these properties look good, word spread, and we got punched in the mouth. My dad ended up getting pancreatic cancer, and I went to the farm to take his place, but I had all these ideas in my head of how we landscaped, and the farming just did not make sense to me that we were not utilizing this. So this is how I see ag. I see colors, I see shapes, and it really changed the way I wanted to put this kind of together. And if you look at this picture over here on the side, that is a lavender field, it's not wheat. But I look at plants and I look at shapes. This is the golden ratio, and I have a bad habit in high school. I had an English teacher, and I always had to write all these real long essays, and I really pulled it out of my rear end most of the time. But I look at this golden ratio, and I think of all these different tangents. I see all these different angles, but this is a sunflower, and nature has figured out this irrational number to be the most efficient way to grow. And it's figured out how to pack more seeds per square area. If you get a close-up on that, you see a spiral. The way that Fibonacci code is, 1 + 1 = 2, 5, and it goes on. And that has changed that little ratio on what some things we can do in our field. So this was one of the first years of constant canopy, and our farm has this resource of a lot of manure. And when I was a landscaper, the way that we would fight our weed pressure was we would grow our grass really tall, we would have a mulch that would cover the surface, and we would have canopy. And that is the way that we've tried through these experiments. How can we manage and take away inputs through offense? So this field was applied with manure, and instead of fighting those weeds through tillage and a lot of herbicide, we're empowering the plants to grow quicker and starting to stage and time these plants. So these here are my two boys. They're now 2 and 4. This is 37.5-inch wheat, and these are radishes. And it's basically like a screen pass in football. The blitz is coming. Mother Nature wants to grow things, so let's empower Mother Nature with seeds and manure to make that happen. So not only the wheat, the cover crops, and the soybeans that we'll get to later, starting to look at other row crops like corn and widening the rows. I have found that intercropping does not work if we try to treat our crops like we always had. You've got to come up with a compromise system. It's not just how do you do things for A and how do you do things for B and try to do both of them. You need to come up with a new system for A, B. So this is 60-inch corn, 86 day, which is really early. And we have a pearl millet cover crop in here. We were wanting to graze it. Mother Nature really didn't work with us this year. But doing that, always doing these experiments opens my eyes to new ideas for the next year. And we're going to start putting chicken tractors in our corn rows and try to use them like a Roomba to manage this cover crop in between it. And if we figure that out, then that was going to be really handy in our transition to organic acres if we can use the animals to distribute the manure and take care of our weed pressure. So this is that same field that I showed you with the cover crops, and this is the wheat in June after it has matured. And what's really neat as we go back to that golden ratio is we have these force multipliers when we think about how these plants will manifest. I'm a big golfer, and you hear Jordan Spieth talk all the time about playing the golf course backwards. I want to get to a certain point with our crop, so what does it take to get to that point? And a big part of this intercropping is when you look at this wheat, this is twin 37.5-inch wheat if we went backwards. That's 7.5 inch on the ground floor, and now we've got about 25 inches up top. but the wheat heads will, due to competition, will grow in a half a circle, or pretty close to 1.618. And what that happens is, if you go from 7.5 to 25 inches wide, you've got a force multiplier there about 3 or 4. But as you times that by 1.6, now you've got a circumference of nearly the same wheat heads as if you had planted the whole field solid. But that shape allows these sunbeams down to our intercrop. And if we can keep that intercrop happy and not really recognize that it's growing with another crop, we can use that wheat to do a lot of dirty jobs that I'm really excited about. We're using it as a manure sink. We have elevated our fertility up on our farm, and instead of applying high rates of manure, we're lowering that rate substantially. And this is all through observation. I want to show you this one picture here, if I get to it. Right here. So this is 2015. That's a really blurry picture. But that is our manure injection sites, and you can see how green that wheat is right there. Well, we took that idea and started seeding our wheat with the manure tanker directly above that manure injection at a much reduced rate. Way back here. And why that's a force multiplier is we're applying 1/6 of the wheat seed, 1/2 to 1/3 of the manure rate, and we can produce wheat for less cost than it costs for the custom dragline to come out and apply it for us. So when we look at these ratios, we're not blocking the sun, so we're empowering these two different plants. So I like the phrase leveraging the plant flex of two different crops in two different seasons. So this reduced manure rate, reduced seed rate allows us to get a value for the time and space of late fall and early spring and not hurt this soybean yield in between. And we're going to do some experiments with different crops in that space. We started putting soybeans in between the corn rows. So when we really look at the solar angles, putting that intercrop right next to the other crop allows new light to come in between that crop, and that light allows both plants to grow pretty vigorously. We're also going to look at interspacing taller crops 3-4 feet away and empowering every direction of that crop. This guy's work is in Virginia, and he's trying to trigger 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 ears per corn plant. So lowering that seed population down to maybe 10% of normal, getting 30, 40, 50% of the yield, but maybe only dinging the intercrop 10%. And I think that's where a lot of this research needs to go as we start integrating these cover crops, these cash crops, and all these. We need to look at how they affect each other. And I think we're really, as we push these yields, we're getting these situations where our next input isn't really giving us a return on our investment. So here's the field that was applied above our manure, and you can see this is in April. You can see that color difference, and that location and that reduced rate is a power that changes the plant. This is a plant dug from just a normal seeded with commercial fertilizer, and the one on the right is a wheat plant planted right above that manure. So that is the beginning of this multiplication. Allows getting the sun down there turns all of those plant multiplications into grain heads. So here's where the magic is in introducing light lower into the plant after pruning. So by taking that wheat out of the way, that biomass, I call leaves it's like a Filipino pearl diver. They can go underwater and live for 4 or 5 minutes through training. And the leaves can do that with intercropping. They're going to be shaded somewhat lower in the plant, but by removing that biomass and pushing that thatch down to the ground, we cool the soil surface. That makes more reflection of light, but it also drives light lower into that inner crop. And what happens with soybeans is it empowers each and every node into that soybean plant. So it takes a lot less plants to produce yield, a lot less plants to produce the same amount of yield. Which in our high fertility situations, it changes the life cycle of that soybean. The pods continue to produce grain weight for, instead of a period of 3 or 4 weeks, we're continuing to get light to every single node of that soybean. So we get bigger soybeans, a more compact nodal situation, and better standability. So it really opens up the door, if you start with this mentality, into other cropping systems of time and space, thinking about getting value out of every seed that we purchase, out of maybe free nutrients like manure, taking care of our weeds through crop canopy. These are some of the things that I'm excited about in the future. And this is a picture of our intercrop right here. And we actually had pearl millet that was taller than the corn, a tremendous amount of biomass. We had comparable corn yields and 5 large round bales. We wanted to graze the cattle, but I think if we start thinking about sharing the sun, we're going to produce a lot more with a lot less. But thank you for your time.